Ever wonder how the ancient Romans made it through those icy nights without fireplaces blazing or cozy blankets to curl up in? I mean, we freak out if the heater stops working for 5 minutes, so how did they manage centuries ago without any of our modern comforts? Well, believe it or not, they were actually pretty clever about it. And no, they weren't secretly hiding electric heaters in their togas. The truth is, their approach to staying warm was way more ingenious and a little gross than you might expect. Let's start with their homes. Most Roman houses weren't wide-open, marble-decked palaces. Regular folks lived in insular, multi-story blocks packed with tenants, shops, animals, and practically no personal space. These buildings shared walls with neighbors, cutting down exposed surfaces to the chill. Tight quarters weren't a crowding problem, they were a heat-saving feature. Families prized the lower floors in winter because they were closer to the earth and sheltered by surrounding units. Upper levels got the brunt of cold winds and were draft central. If you were stuck upstairs, every day felt like a survival test. In wealthier homes and public buildings, Romans turned to something extraordinary, the hypocaust, which is basically just underfloor heating 2,000 years ago. Floors sat on short pillars, forming a hollow chamber beneath. A furnace called the prefernium sent hot air into that space. Heat snaked under the floors and rose through hollow wall tiles. Floors became toasty, walls glowed warm, and rooms stayed dry. Dryness meant fewer illnesses, which mattered in a world without modern medicine. This ingenious system wasn't cheap. It demanded constant fuel, skilled labor to stoke and sweep ashes, and built-in maintenance. Yet Romans installed hypocausts everywhere, from villas in Pompeii to baths in Britain. Soldiers soaked in heated pools while snow piled up outside. They built heat into their lives, not as luxury, but as necessity. But hypocausts weren't universal. Common folks used a more modest tool, the foculus. These were portable metal braziers filled with hot coals, moved from room to room as needed. It was like carrying around your own little heat source. Folks slept near them, worked near them, and gathered round them. Yes, smoke, burns, and fires were risks, but when frost creeps in, even a small flame feels like a fortress. Braziers did more than heat rooms. They heated drinks. Romans warmed calydum-spiced wine using kettles that floated over coals. One mug of hot wine warmed hands, throat, and belly. In cold, that warmth became a simple form of resistance. Architecture played a big role too. Builders oriented rooms to capture solar heat. Winter used halls faced south or west to catch low sun. Thick stone or brick walls soaked up daytime warmth and slowly released it at night. Courtyards funneled sunlight while blocking harsh winds. These designs weren't luck. They were purposeful. Some homes even got semi-buried into hillsides, so earth insulated them naturally. Walls became thermal batteries that moderated extremes. Passively heating homes reshaped daily life. Bath times happen midday, gatherings shift indoors, and fewer rooms see use. Wealthier Romans also used small glass panes, fuzzy, thick, and imperfect. They let in light but held out drafts. When the sun set, shutters clamped down tight. Houses sealed up, trapping heat inside. Think of it as primitive double glazing. Design and architecture covered broader structures. Floors often had mosaics, stone, or tile that trapped warmth from the day. Walls radiated heat long after the sun dipped. Every surface pitched in. Still, heat sources and design didn't tell the whole story. Romans dressed for cold. Clothing meant layering. Linen tunics sat under wool cloaks. Travelers and soldiers wore heavy garments like the lacerna or paenula hooded, blanket-like wraps that shielded wind and trapped warmth. Some were waxed to repel rain or melting snow. Function over form became comfort. Footwear mattered too. Feet wrapped in wool and strapped into thick-soled sandals. Indoors, people padded quietly in felt slippers. Soldiers far from Rome got fur-lined boots for harsh weather. Cold toes were more than discomfort, they threatened survival. Beds were simple. Straw mattresses or filled tickings covered in furs or wool blankets. Some homes raised beds to avoid cold drafts near the floor. Sleeping arrangements doubled as heat traps. People and pets huddled together. A family, a couple, or a dog made a human radiator. Private warmth didn't exist. Collective warmth was what kept you alive. When materials and tools fell short, Romans adapted routines. Cold wasn't a chore, they scheduled around it. Markets and baths shifted to midday. Meetings and meals moved inside sunlit rooms. Doors remained shut. Heating remained minimal but smart. Public buildings followed suit. Baths warmed during the warmest hours. When you visited, you caught warmth both from water and from other visitors. Body heat spread across stone floors. Heat became communal, built into the architecture of daily life. Food habits backed it up. Thick stews, porridge, soups, dense, warm meals filled stomachs and kept you going. Kitchens stayed heated all day, not just for eating, but for mood. Fires weren't just heat, they were hearth, heart, and center. But fires weren't just for food or warmth, they were a symbol. Where fire burned, life thrived, and nowhere was this clearer than in public spaces. Take the Roman bathhouses. These weren't just places to get clean, they were thermal sanctuaries. Massive furnaces roared underneath the floors. The system, the hypocaust, was only half the story. What mattered more was how people used the space. The caldarium, or hot room, wasn't just a hot tub, it was a destination. Friends met there. Business was discussed. The steam soaked into your bones. Time slowed, and for a few denarii, even the coldest pleb could feel like a god wrapped in warmth. Bathhouses were scheduled for maximum efficiency. Most were busiest during cold seasons. Citizens timed their visits to warmest hours of the day, letting the heat linger after they returned home. Even their bodies carried that warmth forward. A good bath could mean a good night's sleep, even if your room still had a winter draft howling through the cracks. In colder provinces, northern Gaul, Germania, Britannia, the strategy went even further. Romans in these regions adopted a mix of local and imperial methods. They insulated roofs with thatch, used timber more liberally, and when stone was scarce, dug semi-subterranean homes that hugged the landscape. Some outposts even had double walls filled with rubble or sand to block the wind. Legionary forts used body heat as an asset. Soldiers didn't sleep alone. Barracks were long, narrow halls lined with men, gear, and straw bedding. Every breath, every blanket, every body was part of the system. Warmth was layered: man, cloth, wall, fire. And everything was timed. They changed guard rotations faster in the cold to keep soldiers moving. Movement was heat. Stillness was risk. In elite circles, warming became an art. Wealthy families didn't just heat floors, they heated entire experiences. Banquets were served with warm towels, wines mulled with herbs, and slaves tasked with tending individual braziers beneath couches. Winter dinners weren't just about food, they were curated thermal events. Everything was designed to comfort, but where things got really creative was in how they handled the cold at night. Romans didn't have what we'd call proper bedsheets. What they had were strigils, blankets, and sometimes, if they could afford it, animal furs. But even those weren't enough for truly icy nights. So they introduced bed warmers, metal pans filled with embers, slid under the bed or mattress just before sleeping. The smell was awful. The safety was questionable too. But the result? Toes that didn't freeze off. Children, the elderly, and the sick were often placed closest to the embers. In households with limited fuel, it was about triage. You heated who needed it most. Everyone else dealt with it because Roman winters didn't care about fairness. Fuel itself wasn't easy. Firewood was expensive in cities. Charcoal was cleaner but pricier. In poor homes, people burned dung, dried grass, even old furniture. Smoke choked the air and lungs suffered. But when survival's the goal, you burn what you have. And still, they found ways to adapt. Some wore nightcaps or wrapped their heads with spare cloth. Others heated stones in the fire and wrapped them in cloth to use like ancient hot water bottles. Some wrapped their feet in papyrus or oiled cloth for insulation. These weren't luxuries. They were small acts of resistance against the cold. Even religious practices shifted. Temples burned sacred fires year-round, but in winter, those fires took on deeper meaning. Shrines became places of comfort, not just worship. Fires weren't only for gods, they warmed the living. Vesta, goddess of the hearth, wasn't just a domestic figure. She symbolized survival. Her flame wasn't allowed to die out for a reason. Rituals around fire intensified in winter. Offerings included warm food, aromatic herbs, and fuel. The Parentalia, a festival honoring ancestors, came during February. Romans believed the spirits of the dead needed warmth too. They lit lamps on graves, brought hot meals, and sat in silence as the cold air swirled around them. Even the dead didn't deserve to be left in the cold. Beyond the cities and rituals, rural Romans took a more rugged approach. Farmers lived with their animals, literally. Cows, goats, chickens, all slept under the same roof. Heat rose, animals breathed, and homes stayed warm. It smelled like a barn because it was, but it worked. In these homes, walls were packed with mud and straw. Roofs leaked, but the thick material trapped heat better than stone. Smoke drifted slowly out the thatch or through holes in the ceiling. There were no chimneys, just controlled chaos. When it snowed, rare but not impossible in places like northern Italy or Gaul, roofs were cleared quickly. A collapsed roof was a death sentence, and snow became insulation pressed against outer walls like ancient thermal panels. Nature wasn't the enemy, it was a tool. Clothing continued to evolve with the climate. In some provinces, Romans wore brachae, wool trousers picked up from Gallic and Germanic tribes. They mocked it at first, called it barbaric. But cold humbles everyone, and by the time emperors donned fur-lined robes in York, no one was laughing. Trade routes also helped. Romans imported wool from Hispania, linen from Egypt, and heavy cloaks from the Balkans. They built a textile economy tuned to climate. Winter gear became a product, sold in markets, customized by tailors, hoarded by the rich. Children had their own tricks. They played games near kitchens. They chased chickens to keep warm. Some even slept in straw piles near ovens if space allowed. Childhood wasn't sheltered, it was resourceful. Doctors, surprisingly, had opinions too. Galen, the famous Roman physician, believed warmth was essential to health. He advised warm drinks, heated oils, and avoiding draughts. Sickness, in his view, often came from cold humors invading the body. So warmth wasn't just comfort, it was treatment. That belief seeped into everything, from architecture to food to behavior. And over time, it became culture. Now, we know that warmth wasn't just something to chase. It shaped how Romans lived, how they prayed, how they raised their kids. But what happened when all those tools failed? Because sometimes they did. Fuel could run out. Fires could die. Storms could trap travelers. Structures collapsed. Floods washed out villages. And in those moments, when there was no wood, no charcoal, no shelter, no strategy, Romans came face to face with the full brutality of winter. There are records of entire legions caught in snowstorms, forced to dig into frozen earth with bare hands, wrapping themselves in wet cloaks, sharing body heat in silence. Soldiers froze standing up, swords still in hand. Civilians fared no better. Poor families, especially in the hills and outskirts, huddled together under crumbling roofs, surviving on breath and hope. The city might have baths and braziers. The countryside often had nothing. In extreme winters, death came quietly. Infants stopped crying. Elderly stopped moving. Frostbite wasn't named, but it was known. Toes went black, limbs stiffened. There were no hospitals, no emergency blankets, no button to press. If your neighbor didn't have extra fuel, that was it. You became another ghost of the season. So people prepared for the worst. They had to. In colder provinces, some didn't even try to fight the weather. They let it pass through them. They curled up, waited, hibernated in all but name. Work stopped. Streets emptied. Life paused. Winter wasn't something to conquer. It was something to endure. The silence of those months said everything. No tools, no fire, just teeth chattering and time stretching long. And oddly enough, versions of this reality still exist. Today. Right now. Because while many of us panic when the thermostat dips a few degrees, there are millions of people, modern-day Romans in a way, who survive winters without central heating. They're in Siberia, Mongolia, rural Afghanistan, northern Pakistan, the Andes, Arctic towns in Alaska and Canada. And even in major cities, you'll find pockets of people, homeless, displaced, abandoned, living outside the warm current of modern life. Their methods echo ancient ones. In Mongolia, yurts, are still insulated with felt and animal hide. Fires are lit with dung. People sleep in tight circles. Wind is blocked with layers, not luxury. The entire lifestyle revolves around not freezing. A cold snap means life changes immediately. It becomes simpler, more brutal, more focused. In rural parts of Pakistan or Kashmir, families store sun-dried firewood all summer, rationing it down to the twig by January. Roofs are patched with straw and earth. Kangris, small portable fire pots, are held under long robes to keep warm, much like ancient Roman bed warmers. There's no thermostat to check, only bone-deep instinct. In Alaska's remote villages, where electricity isn't guaranteed, people trap heat the old way: thick furs, body warmth, and limited movement. Rooms are small for a reason. People live close for survival, not sentiment. The rules haven't changed much since the empire fell. Even in parts of modern Europe, during energy crises or harsh economic downturns, entire apartment blocks go cold. Residents pile on coats indoors. Hot water becomes a commodity. Cold finds the cracks in every wall and in every plan. And for the homeless, the cold is always close. No fire, no four walls, only bus stations, alleyways, or underground tunnels. Survival is daily math. How many layers, how long until sunrise, how much longer the body can hold out. Soup kitchens become sacred, wool socks, currency. So when you strip away the centuries, the tech, the smart thermostats, and double glazing, what's left is the same question Romans faced. What do you do when there's nothing? You adapt, you huddle, you move less, you cover every inch of skin, you stay near others, you insulate, not just with fabric, but with routine. You sleep early, you speak less. You conserve breath, energy, calories. And when warmth does come, fire, sunlight, even another human body, you guard it like gold. This instinct doesn't vanish. It sits under the skin, ready when needed. That's why even today, when the power goes out in a snowstorm, the modern mind doesn't reach for innovation. It reverts. It remembers. Candle, blanket, tea, closeness, fire. These aren't new ideas. They're reflexes. The same ones the ancients trusted when everything else was stripped away. The Romans, for all their aqueducts and engineering, were still human. And when the cold pressed in, they leaned on the same tactics we still fall back on. Layer, heat, sleep, huddle, survive. But the real difference between then and now: choice. That today, most people in the developed world can flip a switch and chase winter out of the room. The luxury isn't the warmth, it's the control. Romans didn't have that, nor do many people today. They still live as the ancients did, planning around weather, not above it. And maybe that's the most timeless part of this story. Cold has always been the great equalizer. It doesn't care about empires, borders, eras, or egos. It shows up, and you respond, or you don't. Ancient Romans didn't survive winter because they were tougher than us. They survived because they paid attention. They respected the season. They built their lives around it. They learned to live with it, not in defiance, but in rhythm. Because when fire dies and walls crack and the cold wraps around your bones like a shroud, all you have left is instinct. And the Roman instinct was simple: stay alive, then rebuild. But that instinct didn't just carry them through the night. It seeped into the blueprints of cities, the pacing of their calendar, the way they spoke about strength, endurance, and control. Their temples faced the sun for a reason. Their roads curved to cut the wind. Their rituals marked the return of warmth like a second new year. They didn't just endure winter, they built around it, prepared for it, and folded it into the rhythm of life. That's the part we often miss. Warmth wasn't comfort. It was earned, secured, guarded, a product of planning, patience, and grit. No miracle, just the reward for not giving up. And maybe that's what really kept them going. Not the fires or cloaks or clever tricks, but a mindset. That cold is a season, not a sentence. That survival isn't loud. It's slow, steady, and stubborn. So, if the heat goes out ever, and the night feels longer than it should, just remember, you come from people who made it through much worse. And they didn't flinch. They adjusted, then kept walking. If you were dropped into a Roman winter with no heat, no tech, and just your wits, what's the first thing you'd do to stay alive? Let's hear your survival plan in the comments.